apply to data-centric digital rights in the context of business and human rights, which is going to be today's main topic. So the IO Foundation has been working in this context for almost 4 years, specifically in Malaysia. We've been looking into how to engage tech companies as well as the government in the context of the Malaysian government having to issue a national action plan on business and human rights, and we've been attempting to convince the organizations involved that looking at technology as a thematic area would be positive step forward in terms of making sure that technology serves citizens the way that it should. Marian will provide some updates on that specific situation in her segment right after myself. So just to give a bit of an introduction, because I know I just threw some terminology and some of you may not be very related to it. BHR stands for Business and Human Rights. Yes. Come again? Oh, fine. I can be on this side. So BHR is short for Business and Human Rights, and on itself, it's even shorter from a longer terminology, which is United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. This is essentially, in a very brief and succinct way of defining it, the attempt from the UN to try to correct a problem that they had with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was that back in the days, corporations didn't have that much weight in the world, and that declaration was only covering governments. As corporations became transnational, it became clear that they had also be beholden to a certain degree of respect towards human rights, but there was no framework to be able to articulate that need. And so there were several attempts back in the 70s that ended up in the 90s. And then finally, this person, John Ruggie, was requested to be able to put a document, and he came up with this United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which are structured in 3 pillars. Pillar number 1, the state duty to protect. Pillar number 2, the corporate responsibility to respect. And pillar number 3, access to remedy. And I believe that Maria will provide a little bit more context about them, but they're quite self-explanatory as they are. So analyzing the situation, what we have is that governments are essentially losing their place in digital spaces. To our understanding, they're very much not knowing exactly how to navigate any of this. Citizens are expected to be very much aware and become experts on technology when their responsibility should be just to be responsible users. And the experts that should be taking care of all of these do not have neither the language, neither the tools to be able to be part of that necessary change. As we were discussing yesterday during the DCDR framework soft launch that we did, there was these core problems that we identified at the IO Foundation. The first one is a deep misunderstanding about the nature of data. And as I was mentioning, there's currently 11 definitions of what is data. So it's going to be a funny trip to try to make everyone be on the same page, not even on how to treat the data if we don't even know exactly or even want to agree on what data is to begin with. Then comes the problem of the way we release software, which doesn't follow the traditional product life cycle in terms of prototyping, testing, compliance, and then distribution. This blur situation between the experts and the citizens that we would like to correct, whereby we can have experts that can take care of all the weight of all the complications, all the difficulties that technology entails, so that the user does not have to care about it. And in order to be able to obtain that, we need to have technologies that are motivated, that are requested to be on policy making, that are trained to be doing policy making, that can explain the complexities of technology to policymakers. And that at the very moment is very hard because we don't even know how to explain to them what we expect from them. And we discussed about this a bit more in depth yesterday during the launch. So the proposed solution that we've been looking into from TIOF was essentially the DCDR framework that we reviewed yesterday, with the outcome of having a universal declaration of digital rights, which I'll also explain a little bit more in detail yesterday. I don't have the time to get into details there now. And you could read it as we describe it here. So protection should be regulated, pillar number 1, designed and implemented, pillar number 2, by the technologist, in the technology itself, so that you can minimize the need for remedy. That is also the pillar number 3 on business and human rights. one element that I always want to insist is that any single product that we have right now competes at the value proposition level, whereas when it comes to technology, they are still also competing at the compliance level, and that's the part that we need to remove from technology companies as much as possible. Now I would like to show a short video that the first time that I saw it gave me goosebumps, and now every time that I hear the first 5 seconds, the goosebumps come back. The story of the video is that about 4 years ago, it got leaked. Nobody really knows the full story of the whole thing, obviously, or at least it hasn't been made public. The context is this video was requested, or was internally requested by the priorly existing Google X department, and it was initially designed to be a food for thought type of production that would only be distributed across Google X and should have theoretically never seen the light of the day. For one reason or another, it got shown, and let's have a look at it.
This man is Jean-Baptiste Pierre Antoine de Monnet Chevalier de Lamarck. In 1809, 50 years before Darwin published The Origin of the Species, he wrote what is widely recognized as the first comprehensive theory of evolution. His book, De Philosophie Zoologique, introduced the notion of an internal code within every living thing, which, when passed down through successive generations, defined the physiological characteristics of a species. At the center of Lamarck's theory laid what he called the adaptive force. He believed that the experiences of an organism during its life modified this internal code, and upon reproduction, this modified version was passed down to its young. Whilst not biologically accurate, and ultimately superseded by Darwin's theory of natural selection, the epigenetic theories put forward by him are beginning to find new homes in unexpected places. When we use contemporary technology, a trail of information is created in the form of data. When analysed, it describes our actions, decisions, preferences, movement, and relationships. This codified version of who we are becomes ever more complex, developing, changing, and deforming based on our actions. In this regard, this ledger of our data may be considered a Lamarckian epigenome, a constantly evolving representation of who we are. This is Bill Hamilton, one of the most significant evolutionary theorists of the 20th century. His work studying the social structures of ants, bees, and wasps had a profound effect on our understanding of the role of genes in social behaviors such as altruism. He believed, and went on to prove, that the driving force behind evolution was not the individual, but the gene. He stated that the ultimate criterion which determines whether a gene will spread is not whether the behavior is to the benefit of the behavior, but whether it is to the benefit of the gene. In the mid-1970s, the British evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins built on the work of Hamilton and others to popularise the concept of the selfish gene. In his book of the same name, he introduced the notion of a gene which, whilst devoid of any motives or will, could be metaphorically and pedagogically described as if it were. In this model, the individual organism is a transient carrier, a survival machine for the gene. User-centered design principles have dominated the world of computing for many decades, but what if we looked at things a little differently? What if the ledger could be given a volition or purpose, rather than simply acting as an historical reference? What if we focused on creating a richer ledger by introducing more sources of information? What if we thought of ourselves not as the owners of this information, but as custodians, transient carriers, or caretakers? Initially, the notion of a goal-oriented ledger may be user-driven. As an organization, Google would be responsible for offering suitable targets for a user's ledger. Whilst the notion of a global good is problematic, topics would likely focus on health or environmental impact to reflect Google's values as an organization. Once the user selects a volition for their ledger, every interaction may be compared to a series of parallel options. If one of these options allows the ledger to move closer to its goal, it will be offered up to the user. Over time, by selecting these options, the user's behavior may be modified and the ledger moves closer to its target. As this line of thinking accelerates and the notion of a goal-driven ledger becomes more palatable, suggestions may be converted not by the user, but by the ledger itself. In this case, the ledger is missing a key data source, which it requires in order to better understand this user. In order to plug the gap in its knowledge, the ledger begins searching for a device which delivers the required data when used. From this list, the ledger begins sorting the options most likely to appeal to the user in question. In situations where no suitable product is found, the ledger may investigate a bespoke solution. By analyzing historical data, it is increasingly possible to discern qualitative information such as taste and aesthetic sensibility, which may be used in the creation of a design proposal. With the advent of technologies such as CNC milling and the emergent possibilities of 3D printing, a custom object may be created to trigger this user's interest. In this way, the ledger is able to plug gaps in its knowledge and refine its model of human behavior. User data has the capability to survive beyond the limits of our biological selves, in much the same way as genetic code is released and propagated in nature. By considering this data through a Lamarckian lens, the codified experiences within the ledger become an accumulation of behavioral knowledge throughout the life of an individual. By thinking of user data as multi-generational, it becomes possible for emerging users to benefit from the preceding generation's behaviors and decisions. As new users enter an ecosystem, they begin to create their own trail of data. By comparing this emergent ledger with the mass of historical user data, it becomes possible to make increasingly accurate predictions about decisions and future behaviors. As cycles of collection and comparison extend, it may be possible to develop a species-level understanding of complex issues such as depression, health, and poverty. Our ability to interpret user data, combined with the exponential growth in sensor-enabled objects, will result in an increasingly detailed account of who we are as people. As these streams of information are brought together, the effect is multiplied. New patterns become apparent and new predictions become possible. Since the 1970s, huge efforts have been made in sequencing the human genome. Today, after many years of research and billions of data points, that sequence is known. By adopting a similar perspective with user data, we may begin to better understand its role. Just as the examination of protein structures paved the way to genetic sequencing, the mass, multi-generational examination of actions and results could introduce a model of behavioral sequencing. As gene sequencing yields a comprehensive map of human biology, researchers are increasingly able to target parts of the sequence and modify them in order to achieve a desired result. As patterns begin to emerge in the behavioral sequences, they too may be targeted. The ledger could be given a focus, shifting it from a system which not only tracks our behavior, but offers direction towards a desired result. We are at the very beginning of our journey of understanding in the field of user data. By applying our knowledge of epigenetics, inheritance, and memetics to this field, we may be able to make mental leaps in our understanding, which could offer benefits to this generation, to future generations, and the species as a whole.
It's coming up. Yeah. we could go for quite a time with that particular video. I hope you can extract some conclusions. As I was mentioning, that the next time you're going to be buying a device, specifically those who are connected with Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and so forth, as to whether it was you who decided to buy that or you were instigated into buying it. And very likely at this point, you may actually get surprised that that device only exists for you because it was printed on purpose for you so they could extract that data point as they were showing in the video. Okay, so going back to the DC data part, what I was trying to show with the video is that there is an actual need to double check how data is being used and how you can actually shape societies if you don't integrate some human rights consideration in how the technology has been. Because when they were saying, oh, as a responsibility of Google, we have some values, but are those the values that their clients are expecting from them? Right now, it's the values from Google, but do they clash or not with other cultures around the world? That's very difficult to discuss. So yesterday I was discussing a little bit about this diagram, this comparison between human rights and digital rights. I'm going to go very, very quickly on it. Essentially, we have people and their digital twins, or the data that represents them. People would go through a series of personal harms or human harms, physical harms, if you prefer. Data would go through a number of digital harms, which is part of the taxonomies that we were discussing yesterday. And you would like to have a proactive attempt to try to avoid those personal harms through human rights and those digital harms through digital rights. And of course, a number of organizations and the public should be paying attention for this to be happening. Now, we also discussed yesterday on this duality between the physical space and the digital space, where in our diagram, we have an entity A and an entity B. Both of them have their own digital twin, and so they correlate with each other. And we were reviewing yesterday that one of the interesting findings that we did when we were trying to put BHR into context of our work was that what really mattered was the source of the harm and the receiver of the harm. And so depending on where the source was originated and when the receiver was between the physical space and the digital space, you ended up having a number of scenarios. And so in the case of human rights, we figured that for as long as the receiver ends up being in the physical world, whether the source is on the physical or in the digital, you can consider it a human right issue. But once you are attacking or modifying or enacting any type of harm upon the digital twin of the entity B, then we will consider that as a data-centric digital rights. Why do I turn back into this? Is because BHR in tech basically is a combination of both. What it allows you to see is that being able to enact the business and human rights framework in the company, specifically in a tech company, allows you to tackle the human rights element and the digital rights element all at once. In order to be able to tackle the digital part, as we were mentioning yesterday, you will have the digital harms taxonomy that we are working on, and as a result, the digital rights taxonomy in order to be able to avoid those harms, and some of the use cases that we were discussing in terms of making sure that the interactions between two platforms or two applications, when they exchange data, we know exactly the type of operations that they are doing. Now, one of the examples as to why you would like to control that is, for instance, when you install an app that requires you to have a specific permission. Typically what happens is that you're providing that permission for the app in general, but not specifically for a feature, which is much more logical. So for instance, not long ago, I was attending the presentation of this neighborhood building management application, where they will be asking you for permission to have access to the your GPS position. Well, the argument was that when there was a panic button, and when you wanted to provide your signal, an emergency, that it was an interesting situation to be able to figure out where you are in the building. Fair enough. The thing is, the rest of the application does not require that permission. And we don't have at the moment any single granularity to be able to assign this kind of permission to specific functionalities where it is granted and it is understood that, well, they make sense, but for the rest, no. Changing a little bit the conversation, but remaining on what's going to be necessary to be able to have this BHR in tech considered, we have to look into who are going to be, who has been pushing for BHR for the past years, and it's mainly NGOs, mainly civil society. governments subscribe voluntarily to be able to enact the National Action Plan. But the ones who are basically trying to make sure that all of this is implemented is NGOs. And when it comes to technology, specifically BHR applied in to tech, we are having a little bit of a problem here. We identified some kind of 3 phases of funding from the traditional funders for civil society, and they've been looking at technology in kind of 3 phases. The first one, they got interested in the platform, as in social media and so forth, looking at technology as a delivering of information, but not how it was built. Then they got interested on phase 2 as to, okay, what's the infrastructure supporting all of that? Finally, they start to very timidly getting started to be interested in who is building that infrastructure. And this is where TIOF started from the very beginning. We didn't care about the platform, we didn't care about the infrastructure, we care about the people who are building the infrastructure. The shift has to go to the builders. As we were mentioning several times, we believe that they are the next generation of rights defenders, rightfully so when you know exactly how that fits into the diagrams that I was mentioning before. Yeah, I went a little bit faster on my presentation than I expected. This will never get old. These are the people who are designing, architecting all the technology. For as long as they don't know what they are doing and they can understand which framework they are doing it, they are never going to be helping to make things better. We will be looking now into the policy brief that we have prepared for the National Action Plan in Malaysia. Hopefully, we will be able to have it as a cross-cutting issue. Mariam, you're going to be explaining some of those terminologies in the presentation? Okay. We're going to be inviting you during the rest of the day to participate and give us feedback about that policy and work on the workshop. So, as usual, as I always finish my keynotes and my presentations, please keep in mind that we are not the people, we are the cyborgs. And if any of you believes that I am overreaching, I invite you to give me your laptop or your phone and have this conversation again in 1 week time. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, John, for the very insightful keynote speech. So unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go for a Q&A session, but I believe that later on in the day, we will have more time for you to perhaps approach John to have further discuss about this. So up next, we'll be having a roundtable session where we will have 3 distinguished guests with us. So firstly, we have Ms. Mariam Lee, the IO Foundation Strategic Program Manager, who will be presenting the IO Foundation's policy brief on business and human rights in the technology sector. Together with her is Mr. Sean Tan, who is on the way, a software manager with legal background, and he will bring us deeper into technology and the pioneering activities we are having here right now. And lastly, to join our discussion table, is Mr. Jared Joseph, a human rights expert who has experience working with government agencies, providing us further insights on the ever-evolving scope of human rights. So ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our speakers, and I shall pass the mic to the IO Foundation Strategic Program Manager, Mariam Lee, to walk us through the